Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining me today on covering this webinar on customer and vendor holds. I'm going to mute everybody and save some questions for the end. My name is Holly Thomason, and I'm an associate consultant at IBIS. And thank you for joining, and let's get started. So the agenda for this webinar is to cover the different types of holds available in Dynamics 3.2. We have the vendor holds, payables transaction holds, customer holds, and process holds. And like I said, I'm going to save questions for the end. Okay, so during the course of business, you might want to place a vendor record on hold. For example, if you received the wrong merchandise from a vendor and you don't want to pay the vendor until the correct merchandise is shipped or everything's been straightened out, you would use the vendor card to put the vendor on hold and to restrict the vendor, and you would also use it to release the vendor from the hold. So when a vendor is on hold, you can't issue or apply payments. However, you can enter, post, and apply transactions from the vendor you placed on hold. And like I said, you would just go to the vendor card, check the hold box, and depending on what's set up in payables management, you might need a password to remove the hold. That's up to you. And like I said, no new payments can be issued or applied, so this is going to restrict what's entered in the payables transaction entry screen, the payables manual payment entry screen. That's also going to prevent any checks from being cut to that vendor. But all other transactions can be entered, posted, and applied just for payment. So here's just the screen of the vendor card if you've never put a vendor on hold. It's just as simple as clicking this hold box and unchecking it to remove, and that's how you do it. And here's just an example of a payment I tried to do with the vendor I put on hold. I entered the vendor name, and as soon as I tagged off from the field, I got this pop-up message that says you cannot enter payment for vendor on hold. So I can't do anything with that payment entry, and I'm just going to have to try again until the vendor is removed from the hold. Okay, so moving on to transaction holds. It's a little bit more specific. So say you have a transaction on a vendor and you're not sure whether or not the amount of that particular transaction is correct, and you don't want to pay the vendor or issue any credits or returns until everything is verified. So this would prevent users from applying a payment or any sort of credit memo or return. And it's the same idea. You would just open the transactions hold window and check any transactions that you would want to put on hold. And you can only do this for transactions that have been posted and are not yet fully applied or paid. So when you are ready to process that transaction, all you would have to do is remove the hold. But unlike vendor holds, you can't password protect transaction holds. So here's the transaction hold window. Like I said, all you have to do is just mark this checkbox next to the transaction name. And if, say, you're putting multiple transactions on hold and you want to get a good view of what you put on hold, you can just click on this printer icon, and that'll print a list of documents that you've marked to be on hold. So transactions holds are good just for if you just want to restrict something for a short amount of time, or you're just not sure and you want to not be able to apply payments, or if you want to use the apply all feature on the apply documents window. If you select apply all, you won't be able to select that payment. So it makes it a little bit easier in that aspect. Yep, so here's just the, if I try to apply a payment to, if I try to apply a document to the payment I have on hold, as soon as I check that checkbox, or try to check that checkbox, I'll get this window that says you cannot apply a payment, credit memo, or return on a document that is on hold. So just won't let me do that, and if I click auto apply, it's just going to try to apply everything except for that payment. Okay, so the difference between vendor and transaction holds, if you're not sure when to use one versus the other, Vendor holds is just if you want to restrict payments that can't be, and you don't want to issue them, documents won't be able to be applied, and it can be password protected under the payables management setup window. Transaction holds, however, just restrict the apply feature, and you can't apply payments to documents. And like I said, you cannot password protect transaction holds. So transaction holds is obviously a little bit more specific if you don't want to restrict everything based on a vendor. So moving on to customer holds. Say you have a customer that has an unpaid balance, they've exceeded their credit limit and they're just a bad customer, they've issued several NSF checks, and you don't really want to do any more sales transactions with them, but you still want to receive payments. So that's what this hold will do. You can still record payments. However, when you try to do a sales transaction, a warning message will be displayed. And depending on your receivables management setup, you might have to enter a password before the sales transaction can be entered, but you will get a warning message at the very least. And it's similar to the vendor hold. All you have to do is go to the customer card, check the hold box, and if you want to set up a password, you have to go to the receivables management setup window to do that. So here is just an example of putting a customer on hold. I've just opened up the customer card and checked the hold box, and the customer is now on hold. You might notice the inactive checkbox next to the hold checkbox. I might get a little bit confused because they could mean the same thing. However, checking the inactive checkbox means you are trying to inactivate the customer record, meaning you don't want to do business with them anymore, and you probably want to remove them from any sort of list or lookup. So before clicking on the inactive checkbox, you would have to make sure there are no outstanding documents or anything like that. It's a little bit more complicated, and you just want to put on a hold if you just wanted to limit the customer for a little period of time until they get their things together, whereas inactive is more of a permanent thing that you would want to make sure of, I guess. So here's just an example of a sales transaction. I don't have a password set up in receivables management, and I'm trying to enter a transaction for this customer Aaron Fitz that I just put on hold. And it's just warning me that customer Aaron Fitz is currently on hold, and it's asking me if I want to continue. So I can say, okay, yeah, sure, I don't mind the hold, or I can just cancel it. But it will still let me enter and post the transaction. It's just warning me. This is an example of a sales transaction with a password set up in receivables management. So it's not going to let me do this sales transaction until I enter a password to override the hold. So if I know the password, I'm free to go ahead and process the transaction. However, if I don't, then I can't do anything until that hold is removed. Now I'm going to get into process holds, and this is for sales documents, and it's a little bit more complicated than the payables transaction hold, but this is if you want to restrict some processes on your transfer, posting, fulfillment, or printing of any sort of sales documents throughout the process, and requires a little bit of setup to begin applying the hold. So here's the setup window. You just have to enter an ID and a description, and if you want to set up a password to remove the hold, this is where you would enter the password. So if I was going to try to transfer, post, or do anything with any sort of sales document that had this approval hold ID on it, I wouldn't be able to do that until I entered the password and removed the hold. So to add the hold, you would go to the sales transaction entry window, click on the hold button, I'll show you that in a minute, and this window would pop up here, and you would select the hold that you want to apply, and you would click assign, and then you would see all of the holds that are assigned to that document. And removing it is just the same. You would just select the hold ID, and click on the Remove button. However, if you had set up a password, as previously shown in the last slide, you would have to enter the password to remove that hold. And this is just a slide showing the sales transaction entries window, and here's the hold button down here at the bottom left. And if there are any holds, you would see this little red stop sign letting you know that there is a hold, and you might be restricted from doing anything with that document until those holds are removed. But you might not be restricted at all if you didn't have any of the checkboxes selected in the hold setup window up here. If you didn't have anything selected, there would just sort of be a notification, and you would still be able to do, whatever you wanted with it. It's just limited to any or multiple of these restrictions. You can also process these sorts of holds for multiple documents just to make it a little bit easier. If you want to mass assign or mass remove any sort of documents, say from yesterday, you could just select the document date, insert the range, and then click assign, and that would process everything for that range. And you can do this for document types or customers, anything of that sort, if you just want to mass assign some sort of approval process or hold. Okay, so just to summarize a little bit of what we've covered so far, we covered the vendor hold, so you would use this when you don't want any new payments to be issued or applied. The transaction holds are a little bit similar, but it just prevents users from applying the payment credit memo or return to a certain document. And then we have on the sales side, the customer holds. You can still record payment from the customer. A password may be required to enter any sort of sales transactions for that customer. And then, of course, process holds controls the processing of sales documents at different stages of the sales cycle. And a good way to see what documents or vendors or customers you have on hold is to use SmartList. There are already some pre-made SmartList for, I know, the vendors, customers, and transactions. You can just load that list and get an easy view of what you have on hold and what you don't. So that concludes today's webinar. I know it was pretty short, but to be honest, adding holds to documents and cards is very easy. But if you have any questions, now would be a good time to ask. If you have any additional questions, you can feel free to email this email address.
Thank you, Holly.
Thank you.